Hi everyone. So we're going to do another example of functions, and I'm going to call this a toUpper function. Well, what do we want the toUpper function to do? The toUpper function we're going to use to capitalize a lowercase letter. Okay. So effectively, we're going to use with just single characters, not strings. Okay. That we have a character come in, say A. Okay, comes into our toUpper function. Okay, and out comes the capitalized version of it, right? If any other character comes in that's not a valid lowercase letter. Let's say it's already capitalized. Okay. We're going to design this to spit out the same thing. Okay, so it doesn't change it. Same if it's like, say, a punctuation. Okay, that it'll leave it alone. Okay, so we only want it to change if it's anything besides a lowercase letter from A to Z. If it's anything else, we're going to leave it alone. Okay. So there's multiple ways to build this. Like a lot of programming logic, you can approach it different ways. Okay. First thing, though, is to always just think about what makes sense in terms of inputs and outputs. Okay. Inputs and outputs. And we've seen this now many times. But in terms of identifying what would make sense as a reasonable function header for this function. Okay. Well, as we saw here, right, we've got a character coming in and we've got a character coming out. Okay, and I gave it a name, toUpper. Okay, so a reasonable function header then would be this. Okay, we've got our output, input, and our name. Okay, so that's our starting point. Let's go in. Let's open up and let the IDE and let's build this. Okay, and I'll talk about the implementation details in a moment, but we can kind of set it up independently of that. Okay. So I'm going to start by writing our function header. Okay. And now let's think about what the logic should look like. Okay. Well, we could kind of, in a sense, stub out the logic a little bit. Maybe step one is to determine if the letter is lowercase. Okay. Determine if it's lowercase. Okay. And then we could have a follow-up step. I'll call it 1B, that if it is lowercase, make it uppercase. Okay. So we could start with that. We also have a follow-up step that if it is not uppercase, okay, I'm sorry, if it's not lowercase, we want to return the original input. Okay, so in a sense, what I'm doing, I'm just kind of scoping out the logic and kind of writing it in English in terms of what the steps would be, right? We want to determine if the letter is lowercase. If it is lowercase, we're going to make it uppercase, and then we're going to return it. Okay, so we might even indicate that too. All right. So we've got this logic that I'm just kind of writing out in a long-winded way. Let's think about how. But it's important to break up into steps what we want to do. Okay. So let's think about how we could tackle this first part. Determine if the letter is lowercase. Okay. So we're going to have an if statement here. Okay, and effectively we're going to do something like this, where we have if letter is lowercase, then, you know, and then we have this other condition where letter is not lowercase. Okay. And we want our comments to be somewhat concise, so I don't need to write all of this stuff. Okay, but we're going to say, we're kind of starting to scope out like how we could approach the problem, right? If it is lowercase, well, let's think about how we would fill this out, right? How do we detect if it is lowercase? Now, there's multiple ways to do this. Okay, I'm going to show you a way relying on the ASCII table that we've seen prior. Okay, so if I come here and I look at the ASCII table, okay, we could see that A, lowercase a, is decimal value 97, and so 97 to 122 are our lowercase values. Okay, 97 to 122 is our lowercase ASCII values. So we've seen prior how if we did something like this, okay, this takes the character letter, okay, and gets us the ASCII value, how numerically in binary that is stored in your computer's memory. Okay, so if the letter A comes in, that's going to be 97. If it's K, it's going to be 107, okay, and so forth. So one of the things that we could do, how we could build this, is to check, is the ASCII value greater than or equal to 97, okay, and less than or equal to 122, okay? That's basically saying, is it lowercase? That's what it's checking. Is it lowercase? Okay. If it is, we need to, if it is lowercase, we want to make it an uppercase letter, okay? So we want to change this ASCII value, okay, to something that's going to make it something that is uppercase, okay? To make it something that's uppercase. So how can we do that? Let's go back to the table, right? Let's look at the relationship between lowercase a and uppercase a, okay? Notice lowercase a has value 97, uppercase a has value 65, okay? It's 32 is the difference. So if we subtracted 32 from 97, we'd get to 65, and that would store it as a capital A, okay? Similarly, if it would be the same thing if we did that for any other letter, we look at R is 114, right? Minus 32 gets us to a capital R, which is 82 in ASCII in base 10, okay? So what we could do here is we could do something like this, right? That's the ASCII value for the uppercase letter, okay? And then we can have our letter, we could set it back. We want to store it as a character, right? And then we could go ahead and return that uppercase letter, okay? Right, so it's very important to understand how ASCII values work in terms of storing information for characters to understand how this logic works. Okay. Now, if it's not lowercase, we're going to go ahead and just return the original. We don't have to do anything. Okay. So this is the logic. Okay. This is the logic to make this happen. Right, just one more time passing through, let me kind of remind you what we're doing here. Okay, letter, we're typecasting it to an integer. Okay, that treats it as the ASCII value, how in binary that's stored in your computer's memory. Okay, we know by looking at the ASCII table that anything in the range of 92 to 122 is lowercase. So if it is lowercase, we're going to go ahead, we're going to subtract 32 off the ASCII value, because we know that if we subtract 32 from a lowercase letter, that gives us the ASCII value for an uppercase letter, looking back at the ASCII table. Okay, we're going to typecast that back to a character because we want to return an uppercase character, right? So we're changing the data type back to a character, and then we would go ahead and return that uppercase character. Okay. All right, if it's not lowercase, if it's anything else, if it's already an uppercase, if it's not lowercase, if it's anything else, so if it's uppercase, if it's punctuation, spaces, whatever, we're just going to return back the original. Okay, now, we should test what we're doing, right? The general rule in programming is if you don't test it, it's not going to work. It's very easy to make mistakes, right? Sometimes they could be very subtle mistakes that are very hard to catch just by looking at the code. So let's test this. So we need to write something that's going to call it to test that it's indeed working correctly. So let's run a couple things. Let's test it with toUpper with maybe a lowercase a, and I can just call it right like this. We could test it all in one line. I could do that. Let's create a bunch of different tests here. Yeah, let's do 5 different tests. We'll test it with, a common way of testing these things is you test it with some extreme ones. Test it with A, test it with Z. Let's test it with punctuation, spaces, right? And maybe something next to it in the ASCII table, like, let's see. So Z, what's next to Z is an open curly bracket. Let's test that. Okay. So what we should see is A should become capital A, Z should become capital Z, and everything else should remain unchanged, right? If we built this correctly. Let's run it. Okay, and that's indeed what we get. Okay, so it's working correctly. All right. And we could use functions different ways. Maybe I could show you one other example here. Let's build a string, and we'll have the string say something like, hello world, right? We're going to capitalize that. Well, how could we capitalize a string using this function? Well, we could do something like this. String length, str. Okay, and we can say we're going to print out one character at a time, and we're going to take the uppercase version of that letter at every time through. Okay, so what's happening in this example is we got this string here, which is an array of characters. Okay, we're going to iterate through every single character one at a time. So we're going to first check H. We're going to uppercase H when we call this. This is going to turn into uppercase H, right? That call to that function. And then we're going to print it out, just that one letter. So we're going to print out uppercase H. Then we iterate and go to the next letter, right? We're going to then calculate, we're going to determine that lowercase e is capital E. And we continue. When we hit space being passed into this, it's going to say the same thing, just space. And same with the explanation point, right? So it's doing it, it's calling this function over and over and over and over again, okay? So I can go ahead and run this. Okay, I might, let's see if I'm, oh, yep. I got something in the terminal that came up that was kind of an interesting thing to note. It actually still worked my IDE anyway, kind of dealt with it in a pretty good way. But just to kind of point out one thing is I'm getting this warning about the string length. What I really am supposed to have here to get that to work, although it still did work in this case because it was able to kind of figure it out in terms of how the environment is set up. But I should include the string library to use that function. Okay. But we could see this worked correctly, right? It uppercased the entire string by calling it. It called the function over and over and over again, once for each letter in the string, okay, by looping through it. Okay. We will see later on we'll do an example where we build a function that's designed to work not for one character to uppercase it, but for an entire string. Okay, but we need to learn a couple more things to be able to do that and kind of understand effectively what it is that we're doing. But for now, we'll close out that example and close out this video. And please watch it multiple times for anything that's confusing and making sure that you really understand the logic, how things work. This one in particular has some nuances related to type conversions and ASCII values and so forth.